What a rather incredible beginning of this June we've had in the community. Aaron Uritis, our CEO, who has led this organization for going on 6 years, has been so keen to have us ensure that we are delivering nimble, smart solutions and collaboration in real time. And so that's exactly why we're here. So again, thank you all. Quick note in terms of the logistics of this webinar. You probably just heard the recording in progress. That's just for internal purposes. We're not actually distributing this outside of our partner community. And no doubt you've probably seen at the bottom of your screens, you can submit Q&A directly to us. We'll be curating that. As we go through this content, I will be pausing along with Bob 3 times. So we're not going to speak for 45 minutes and then just have just about 15 minutes. Rather, we're actually going to pause throughout to ensure that you all have an opportunity to engage and give us your feedback and your comments. So with that, Karina, may I ask you to get us started here? So where we are now, hopefully this is looking familiar. We are awash in rainbow social media, from airports to our favorite products to our favorite services, airlines, and more. And Karina, I know we're also have some animation floating in. And in the midst of this wash of rainbow, we have also no doubt seen some headlines that have landed like a big thud on the table. Whether it was an individual named Matt Walsh, a bit of an anti-LGBTQ plus agitator online, or certainly this week, I think many of us were sort of sitting straight up in attention as our sibling organization, the Human Rights Campaign, declared a national state of emergency for all LGBTQ plus people around the country, and as we navigate quite a challenging year. So if you are finding yourself rather dizzy with, you know, where are we? Are we celebrating? Are we joyful? Are we fearful? Are we anxious? Well, you've come to the right place, because between my dear friend and mentor, Bob Whittick, and I together, we have about 45 years, I think, right, Bob, of direct consultation with so many of you. And the best advice they will tell somebody when you're entering a new organization or you're grappling with a challenge, find the cool-headed veteran, find somebody who's unflappable. And I think, Mr. Whittick, you are probably the most unflappable business strategist I know. So thank you again. Welcome. Thank you so much for your generous time today and for giving us your insights. And if you want to give just a tiny bit about how you came to this space.
Well, I'm deeply honored. I'm proud to be in this family. I want to tell everyone my pronouns are he, him, and his, but my adjectives today are proud and loving, because what I want to make sure is that we don't lose sight of the fact that we are a bold, proud, and determined community. And we have deep allies throughout corporate America. This is the work, Dina, that you and I love and that I have been doing for 3 decades. And I have to tell you, risk and reward are always at the table. And for us, our job is, our mission is focus on the rewards and the safe harbor for everybody and all your brands. So we're excited to talk to you about it today. We got a lot to cover.
We do. Thank you so much, Bob. And once again, if you're hearing a mystery voice in the ether here, this is Dina Fidas, pronouns are she and her, and I get to serve as our Managing Director and Chief Programs Officer alongside Aaron Uritis and my extraordinary colleagues here at Out and Equal. So no doubt, this has been an exceedingly challenging year. And as we look ahead to this next slide, the damage is real. The reason that organizations like HRC, like Equality Florida, and through an intersectional lens, you're seeing travel advisories emerge from other civil rights organizations, because the passage of legislation is creating damage, it's wreaking havoc. You've probably heard through headlines or through notifications from your partnering LGBTQ plus organizations. 2023 has been the worst year on record for the number of anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced. Now, that number is approximately 500 anti-LGBTQ plus bills introduced. Now, that doesn't mean they've all passed. Of that number, about 64 have in fact passed, excuse me. Most of these bills have been aimed squarely at the trans and non-binary community. It's important to note that that delta between the 500 introduced versus the 64 passed, that delta, a lot of businesses buffered. They buffered against this damage, and many of that buffering took place behind closed doors. Businesses quite literally using their state house capital, having their executive champions and their business resource groups testify, having them come in and say, look, we don't even want to debate the terminology here. Please stop wasting our time. This does not make good business sense. It doesn't make good economic sense. Please kill this bill. And so we absolutely are seeing, even with this damage inflicted, the fact that we had 500 introduced and 64 passed tells us that the resistance is still strong. Now, it's important, though, for everyone on this Zoom to know, and I see the numbers now ticking up to about 200, so welcome to those who have just joined. The introduction of those 500 bills, the introduction itself creates an incredible amount of stress in the system. Imagine being, and perhaps this is in fact your story, whether you're a parent of a trans and non-binary child, you yourself identify as trans and non-binary, that's how you're receiving your morning news, through the lens of attacks on your personhood. Be pretty hard to focus on the morning meeting. So with grave, I should say, respect, we want to acknowledge that the damage has been done this year. And at the same time, as with so much in our movement, we live in a lot of both ands. And at the same time, even with this damage, it's important, we think, for us to tether ourselves to those legal protections that have not changed, that remain strong today. And I think with a bit of reflection, I'll turn to Bob to add a bit of texture here. I'm in my 40s. That means that when I was applying to my first jobs, this was a point in time in which gay men in particular were still getting targeted and arrested simply for having relationships. That was not resolved until the Supreme Court case in 2003 of Lawrence v. Texas. It means that after the brutal killing of Matthew Shepard, when his parents went lawmaker to lawmaker with tears in their eyes, they never asked to be advocates. They never asked to be grieving parents. They begged for hate crimes protections. That didn't happen until 2009. And that was the first federal bill that covered our community explicitly. In other words, it had the terms sexual orientation and gender identity. So while a lot of this progress has happened, it's still fairly recent. Certainly now the LGBTQ plus community can serve openly. Marriage equality, which enjoyed a sea of support from the corporate community, arguably one of the first and most muscular champions in terms of the public fight for marriage equality there. And of course, heroes like Amy Stevens and the plaintiffs who garnered us Title VII protections with the Bostock case. So on the one hand, I think we need to recognize the real damage that's happened. I think it's also vital that all of us sort of take stock and say, okay, we're still here. We still have a level of floor under our feet and baseline protections. But from the lens of your world, Bob, what does this say to you in terms of the strength of the community?
Well, the thing that I have to confess to, and those who know me best will already realize, I was in high school during the Stonewall Uprising. And so everything that you've outlined here, the chronology is very, very well, it's very, very familiar to me. The one thing that the law has to do with in our lives, it has to be a lived reality ultimately. And when we pass breakthrough and historic decisions in the courts, the community has to invest now the time to educate and elevate the experiences of our employers, of our allies, to bring this truth and these protections to our world, to our communities. And in fact, the last one, the Bostock decision, I'd say right now is going to play a critical role as a pillar of how we're going to animate basically non-discrimination in all aspects of our lives, especially for people who have different gender identities. I think that's one that's going to be toughest. But nonetheless, our job now, and companies play a huge role in this, in creating environments and in advocacy that give promise to these decisions.
Thank you so much, Bob. So we've got our lens of legal equality. I'd like to turn now, Karina, to where we are in terms of the picture of corporate support. Where are the norms? Something that has changed because of the extraordinary work of the Out and Equal family, of those of you on this call, of strategists and visionaries like you, Bob, is that pride and the internal commitment with real investments that are affecting people's lives are in most cases one and the same. In other words, the companies that are waving a rainbow flag right now, it's a direct extension of deep investments in gender affirming care and coverage for their trans employees. It's a direct extension of investing in their LGBTQ plus BRGs and ERGs. We are at a moment in time in which it is harder to find a Fortune 500 company that doesn't protect us than it is that does. This is fully the norm now, to acknowledge, protect, and want to attract and retain LGBTQ plus talent. It's also vital to note that companies have not only made their own internal workings more equitable and more attractive to the LGBTQ plus workforce, they have looked outside, if you will, of their four walls and said, you know what? It makes good business sense, it makes good economic sense, and it's just plain right for our country to have full federal civil rights protections for the LGBTQ plus community. And that's why, in a break from any other trend that's ever happened in the history of this country, you have overwhelming corporate support, 500 plus businesses that support the omnibus civil rights bill known as the Equality Act. The Equality Act is not yet law of the land, but it enjoys an enormous amount of support from the corporate community. And as I mentioned, we have seen businesses step up and speak out against anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. So the level of investment is there, and I want to offer to this group that the corporate commitment is still very strong, even with some of these blips, some of these headlines, but the leadership, the leaders need our support and our guidance in this current climate. Bob, you've really been the engine, the vision behind a lot of these changes and guided companies through it. Did you ever think that in your career you would be standing in a place in which, you know, it's a dying minority of companies that don't acknowledge our community?
Well, it's interesting because in the mid 1990s, we did a prototype, I think, as you remember, the Corporate Equality Index, and speaking to companies in the mid 90s about whether they even had these policies, we had to break through ranks of lawyers to get them to confess whether they had them or not. They were even at that time risk averse about publicizing that they were non-discriminating employers. That's changed dramatically. And what it does mean for us is that our principles and values are aligned, that we see that America's economic successes are dependent on building a workforce and a customer base that doesn't discriminate.
Yes, thank you so much. And Karina, I think we'll go to the next. So we've established sort of our strengths. Now we want to take the bull by the horns. What is on a lot of folks' minds, these pride boycotts. We want to say, you know what, these are recycled tactics, and we've seen this before. We've absolutely seen this before. There we go. Only our animation could go right on cue. I promise it was more dramatic. Just a quick sprinkling, you know, from this time. But Bob, do you want to elaborate on what we're doing in terms of this, the open letter from
Sure.
concerning American Airlines?
back in the 90s again, I have the voice of the Wayback Machine, I think, Dina, which I apologize for. What Dina and I want to emphasize is this is not the first rodeo for any of us. And in fact, companies have faced these assaults in the past. And what they have in common is what American Airlines faced in the 90s when they were beginning to tiptoe into the community and support LGBTQ events and causes. They were happy to do it, but then all of a sudden one day, a galvanized anti-gay counterforce put public letters in the pages of the major newspapers of the time. Thank God it wasn't the internet, right, Dina? I mean, it would have been truly universal. But what happened then is they believed, with wrongly, fortunately, is that they kill the lead dog, all the rest will follow. They believed that corporate America was a herd, and that if the herd got scared, that they would run away. And so they want to make an example. And that's really where we are today. What they're trying to do is create examples. And if you read today the stories of Target and Budweiser, two companies do not a trend make yet. What we're really witnessing is that if they can throw enough panic into corporate America, they can change the course of history. They can't.
Thank you so much, Bob. And Karina, can I ask you to flip now the flip screen here, which I think we're all thankful for, although I do still love 90s fashion. It's not 1999 anymore. Where some of these scare tactics, I think, did put some real anxiety in the system at one time. Where do you go? Cracker Barrel has proudly displayed its rainbow rocking chairs. They've won Audis at the Out and Equal Summit. Walmart has an extraordinary Pride and Joy campaign right now. American Airlines stood firm in the 1990s and never wavered, and they continue to be strong in their commitment. Something to a bridge to I think further emphasize. It's not just a data point to say 90% of the Fortune 500 companies support our community. Well, what does that mean? Try to boycott a tech company that supports our community, and you're probably going to be left with chalk on a sidewalk. Try to boycott a soda company or a cereal company, your favorite food and beverage company, and you're probably going to have a rumbling tummy. What we mean is you would be hard pressed to find an industry right now that not only has leaders, but isn't overwhelmingly filled with companies that are fully supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. And so while with respect for what some of our partnering companies have been enduring the last few weeks, I think we also want to raise up for this group that absolutely a Twitter storm cannot bottle up decades of progress here. And it absolutely cannot take back the fact that an overwhelming number of the global trendsetters, the Fortune 500 and others, support our community, and that's not going to change. The other key element here that has changed since some of these initial boycotts began, and I think, the sociologist in me would say this actually in many ways explains what is probably the last gasp. In many ways, a last gasp, a last really vitriolic attempt to squelch the momentum of non-binary inclusion, of young people claiming their identity as part of this beautiful queer community. We know, and thinking about Harvey Milk's statement, come out wherever you are, the idea that when you know somebody personally who's LGBTQ plus, it's really hard to harbor bias or hate in your heart. And right now in the US, 2 out of 3 US adults know someone personally who identifies as gay and lesbian. Finding some of the data around knowing somebody who's bi is a little harder, but I do want to acknowledge that. The number that is ticking up, the trend line here, that's rather extraordinary and been much more rapid. 4 in 10 US adults know someone who's transgender. When you look at how our friends, neighbors, and colleagues think about our civil rights, 80%, 8 in 10, want us to have them. They want federal equality for the LGBTQ plus community. Now, when you think about the so-called backlash, when you think about negative reactions to Pride Month, to merchandise, and so forth, if I told you that I had a new soda or a new t-shirt or name the product that will no doubt appeal to a minimum of 7% of the population. Do you think your executives would laugh me out of the room? Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because that's an enormous number of people. 7.2%, and this is a more conservative estimate of the US population, identifies as LGBTQ+. When we look at those young people who are going to swell our ranks, who are buying our products now, it's 1 in 5. 1 in 5 Gen Zers identify as LGBTQ+. So you could talk about the right thing to do. You could also talk in terms of cold hard cash profitability here, in the sense that this is about what is right for the business case. And that's something I think, particularly Bob, you were one of the early leaders in this movement, when Out and Equal was getting stood up, when the Corporate Equality Index was getting stood up, when we could take nothing for granted, that we had to lead with this rather novel idea that there's a business case for inclusion. Are you seeing that this is a time to sort of double down on that business case?
Well, the metrics don't lie. In fact, every meeting that we've had for 30 years has been based on knowledge. We had a community that was desperately wanting to be visible, but terrified a bit of being counted. And so along the way, what the numbers tell us today is that we've integrated our lives into the economy in a very meaningful way. But more important, I'd say this: we will never be a majority of all Americans, but our majority will always speak up for us. And I think it's the allies, friends, coworkers, neighbors who really speak to what the marketplace is today. Because a lot of the folks who shop at Target, a lot of the folks who choose one brand over another, they say in market research over and over again, they want to buy and favor products and services offered by companies that don't discriminate and that welcome LGBTQ people. Those are huge changes. The marketplace doesn't lie.
Thank you so much, Bob. I had promised a pause point, and I'm seeing some questions come in. Most of them are sort of asked and answered in the chat box. One individual is asking if we will be mentioning guidance on how to respond to internal backlash. Absolutely. So hang tight. We'll get to that very soon. Any other questions, as we have now covered some of these foundational pillars? When you think about the arrows in your quiver headed into either a tough conversation or to simply bolster your own business case, where are we in terms of our legal protections? Where are we in terms of our peers or the corporate momentum, the corporate trend lines? And where are we in terms of population data and public opinion data? Those 3 pillars together form a fortress that really buffers you against this idea that this is somehow a new topic or a fringe or a weak topic. In fact, it's the opposite. Karina, I think we'll keep our eye on the questions, and we'll go ahead then to the next slide. Thank you. So a couple of bottom lines here. This is a time to center our strength as we are navigating complexity. So yes, have there been some flare-ups? Absolutely. Are some of those flare-ups magnified by the 24-hour news cycle? Yes. Without revisiting some of these names, we're seeing the same 1 and 2 companies named again and again. Compare that to the overwhelmingly positive reception right now of pride statements from executives, joyful, incredible, deep intersectional work that BRGs are doing right now, social media awash in beautiful rainbow colors. All of that is so much bigger than 1 or 2 instances. And yes, with seriousness, there is real hurt and harm that is felt across this country and around the world, with respect particularly to the targeting of trans and non-binary people. And at the same time, we affirm that no, the corporate community is not in full retreat. Some of the genesis of this conversation, when Aaron Uritas and Bob and I were talking this week, we're looking at these headlines saying, have they not picked up a report recently? How can they say that the corporate community is in retreat? Because the answer is absolutely not. The data is just not bearing that out. I also want to assert that 25, 30 years of progress will not be undone with tweets and upset over some rainbow merchandise. That doesn't mean we don't need to stay strong. We do, but I also want to shore up our strength and our pride in our community today. That when you engage with your leaders, that you are firm in your resolve. We are not in retreat right now. Bob, any other texture you want to add to this component?
Well, I'll tell you, I've been looking at data in the marketplace, some of the metrics, and InterPride, which represents more than 375 pride groups globally, they said that 40% reported their sponsorship dollars are up 20% this year. So it doesn't read to me as though anyone is in retreat. I think they're being smart, they're being strategic, and they're very cause focused. I think we clearly always evaluate pride in some ways as a celebration, but it's also digging deeper into the causes that we can support and strengthen that make up our community, and the marginalized, especially those, especially in gender identity and trans communities who feel particularly targeted. These are opportunities, I think, for a lot of corporations to double down in terms of their support in those areas.
Thank you, Bob. And I'm just ticking off one or two of the questions coming in. Let's now get to some of our action mapping for Pride, Karina. So no doubt, your plans have probably already been crystallized. Some of them are probably already under your belt. Let's talk about where we go from here. And, reminder, this is not the first Pride Month that has begun with a level of crisis in the system. I'm thinking about the very grave way that we began Pride a few years ago with the murder of George Floyd, and how celebration turned into mourning and to deep reflection on the need for more intersectional programming and centering of racial justice. And so you've been here before. I encourage you to draw on that muscle memory in terms of what it means to be able to employ and implement what I would call your 3 R's in this moment: recentering, revise, and recommunicate. So as I mentioned, your plans are probably already in motion. At this moment in time, in light of everything that's transpired, recenter. Recenter as a BRG, as an individual leader, and help facilitate for your own executives a recentering in your own company and personal commitment to the LGBTQ plus community, especially in light of this year of extraordinary challenge. Recognize both the legal and physical risk that many people are under right now and the human toll that takes. The second is recenter the vision, strategic framework, and tactics of your Pride plans. What do we mean by that? Well, what are we trying to do? Let's get recentered in that. Maybe we thought a month or two ago it would be great to have a stretch goal or a big strategy that was really envelope pushing. Is that really what we want to do? Let's get recentered in exactly what we were trying to accomplish. Are we trying to stand up a new ERG in a particular locale, or prime and lift up a new executive champion? Are we recentering ourselves in perhaps a new level of education for our own workforce and engaging allies? If we presented data that really bowled you over today and you realize, you know what, I'm not sure my leadership knows that 1 in 5 Gen Zers are LGBTQ. Maybe you can recenter and revise some of your existing programming to that more educational lens. So recentering. Now, revise. It may be because of the climate we're in that you opt to tweak or revise plans depending on geography, stakeholder voices, and prep time. Now, the view behind the curtain, as we know, is we might have really lofty ideas, whether it's a social media campaign, whether it's edgy new messaging, envelope pushing messaging from an executive, or maybe it's merchandise. I think if the last several weeks has taught us anything, it's that we need to thoroughly engage all relevant stakeholders before something goes to prime time. And you know what? If you have not, for whatever set of reasons, been able to do that thorough engagement before going to prime time, you might opt to revise your plans. That's not retreat. That's strategically and smartly saying, you know what? If we didn't adequately prep everybody we needed to, and we're under a time crunch, let's revise a little bit. Let's revise, let's hold on this one piece and reevaluate that for National Coming Out Day or another time when we have a longer runway. Treat Pride Month with the same rigor and seriousness that you do other business plans. Lastly, re-communicate. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Oh, and communicate again, re-communicate. Assume your stakeholders are busy. They need streamlined and accessible communication. As much as I love and feel incredibly fortunate to be a member of this beautiful, diverse LGBTQ plus community, we are a community that goes by a group of letters. Don't assume that your very smart, well-meaning executives understand all of that. Try to make life easy for them. Employ palm cards, have a sit down with them. Ensure that your BRG leads, your ERG leads are not only communicating practical guidance for them, because certainly no one wants to go out in public and have egg on their face or be caught flat-footed by a question that they don't know the answer to. But really importantly, and I think Bob drove this home, ensure that you've got those fundamentals of your business case up to your stakeholders with respect to your Pride plan. Whether it's, hey, look, we're a new media company, these are our folks, we're a Gen Z facing company, or whether it's tethered to, look, this is about our people. We are a company that proudly has had a BRG in existence for 30 years, and this is about honoring who we are. So your 3 R's: recenter, revise, and re-communicate.
Dina, I would add exactly on that last point is that when companies do find themselves in the headlights, it is a great time for all of us to remember to thank, reward, and give your back to the leadership. Because when a company does the right thing, they need to hear from us. They're going to hear about everybody else if they do whatever a misstep, that's for sure. But when we get it right, let's get everybody lined up and say thanks.
That is so important. Thank you, Bob. Absolutely. And Karina, I think thank you so much. Now to organize our thinking a bit in this last half an hour or so, important to recognize, generally speaking, our Pride programming falls into these 3 verticals: merchandise and branding, corporate and executive messaging, and ERG, Employee Resource Group, or BRG, Business Resource Group activities. At the highest level, merch and branding is about celebrating the community and connecting with that external market. Bob, you led the pioneering market research on this community. May I ask you, what is the current estimated value of the LGBTQ plus consumer market?
Well, I'd say conservatively, it has approached 1 trillion because the numbers, certainly of our population, as we have been able to measure them, have grown. One of the things that you pointed out in Gen Z, and I think in Gen X, is that the proportion of out and visible consumers grows incrementally each year, rather dramatically. So again, though, when we talk about buying power, I'm very careful to add, it doesn't connote affluence. What it connotes instead is that we have buying power and we allocate it to brands that we trust and support. We're no different from other consumers in that way.
Thank you so much. I'm also seeing some questions come in, and so I think we'll get through the rest of this game plan and then turn back to these questions. The corporate and executive messaging, of course, is not only about establishing and reinforcing your company's values of inclusion, it's also a vital signifier. Not a very technical term, but geez, if you're not speaking pride, you're just not with it. I just can't imagine a young person entering the workforce right now seeing a lack of any recognition of Pride Month and actually being interested in that employer and that brand. We do see again and again, it's not just the 1 in 5 Gen Zers who are self-identifying as part of the community. Multiply it by their friends, their teachers, their family members, and you've got so much collective shared investment and building expectation of visibility of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging values. And lastly, ERG and BRG activities. These are not just social, these are educational. You're bringing in, out and equal. I think we're committed to roughly 50 sessions this month. We've got a frenetic pace here. You're bringing in speakers that are speaking to multiple BRGs at once, people who embody multiple identities. I would also say that in addition to marching in parades and providing that visibility at a very tactical level, there's so many stories we hear. I had no idea that this aerospace and defense firm was supportive of my community, but I found them at Pride, at the Pride table. I actually got to talk to a transgender engineer. I can't believe it. Or, my parents stumbled into this and they brought home a business card. So as we think about how do you go from an ERG, an employee resource group, or an affinity group, to a BRG, look for those business value points. What are you bringing back? Yes, it's about joy and celebration, but you are an ambassador of the company and its values today, this weekend, and throughout Pride Month. Karina, we'll go to the next one. Thanks, Karina. And we can sort of quickly scroll the second element here. Thank you so much. So a couple of key questions here that will, I hope, facilitate for you. Some of you have been looking for some more concrete guidance. One is, when deliberating or recentering and potentially revising your own Pride-related engagement, ask yourself, what is our timeline here? Not just a timeline of what you've done for Pride months past, but look at the sum total of your company's timeline with respect to LGBTQ plus inclusion. Were we one of the early pioneers on partner benefits? Were we an early leader on gender identity protections? Have we won an out and equal Audi? Who are we as a company? That's your core business case. That's where the investment lies. And Pride, in many ways, it's the rainbow icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself. The cake, the substance of it, if you will. I have 2 kids, so cake counts as substance around here. The cake is that's really where the heart is. It's decades in some cases of the company saying this is valuable to us and to our game plan for attracting and retaining talent. The second I want to highlight here, when it comes to merchandise and branding initiatives, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you leveraging social media? Are you trying to connect with the consumer market? Something that's quite important, depending on the brand or the unique merchandise, do you have customer data? We love touting this 1 trillion, tweets are cheap, dollars speak, but do encourage you to look at, in some cases, highly proprietary data within your company. How are hospitality guests experiencing our brand? Does it vary by geographic location or by segmentation? And so particularly if you're leading an effort or you're championing an effort that is more envelope pushing, you will be stronger positioned if you've tethered it to some of your own unique data, not just this broad picture of LGBTQ buying power. Bob, you've been in the thick of it. Eye of the storm and PR moments. Anything else that comes to mind in terms of these elements of guidance?
Well, when I'm talking to a decision maker, you and I remember this important framework, is that Pride season is a moment in time. They are looking at the horizon the next 5 to 10 years. And the good news, or the better news for every brand, every marketer, is that it's the 18 to 34-year-olds, it's younger consumers and households that are going to make up the difference. And they are well ahead, miles ahead of the population in general, in terms of their commitment to inclusion, to their engagement with the LGBT community. In fact, they are more than twice as, according to recent GLAAD data, they're more than twice as likely than the general population to say that protecting the rights of the LGBTQ community should be a top priority for brands when it comes to contributions and resources. So what we're fighting for is the share of mind and loyalty of younger generations, and they're the ones that are paying attention. So we're not fighting today's battles today. We're winning today's battles for the next 10 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Bob. I'm seeing some really great questions come in, so we'll just get through a little bit more content here. I think we've got just 3 slides to go, and then I'm eager to get to some of these questions. Couple more things here in terms of corporate and executive messaging. I won't go over everything on this slide because I think it's pretty apparent. What I want, though, to highlight for you are two pieces here. I sort of jokingly referenced, we go by an acronym. That can be intimidating. That acronym can be quite intimidating for executives. Giving them a brave space, a space for them to engage and ask questions is really important. And that may be your BRG leadership, an individual who's comfortable telling their story, who's also comfortable in a brave space, who's not in a space of great vulnerability. So being strategic about who can dialogue with the executive and provide them with that learning. Karina, we'll go to the next one. Okay, so going live, a couple of other checklist items for your game plan. Number one, how are we preparing our executives, line managers, and/or store managers? This runs the gamut, whether you're talking about a social media campaign, a new partnership, new merchandise. And I always say, get tactical, get practical. Palm cards, intranet announcements. Again, assume people are busy, assume good intent, but folks are busy. They don't necessarily understand everything that's happening right now and all the nuance. Try to distill it into digestible pieces. The second here, evergreen messages and vehicles. You cannot go wrong. And I can tell you from CEOs confronted at their own shareholder meetings over the years that deflected critiques of their stances on marriage equality, that deflected critiques of their bold positions on trans inclusion. You cannot go wrong by centering your own employees, clients, and customers. This is about our people. We're not commenting on some out there social issue. This is about our own people. This is about our customers and our clients. That is always the cornerstone of your strategy here in your business case. Reiterating your existing policies of LGBTQ plus inclusion or your history of it. Again, investing in those briefings, do some roll-ups, and you might actually, as a BRG, have fun with it. It might be surprising to you to know that, hey, I didn't realize we've been 100% on the CEI for this long, or I didn't realize we were the first to partner with NGLCC in our industry. Use us, use Out and Equal. We are here to support you. We have never been the name and shame group. We work direct with our partners, and we're proud of the work that you all do day in and day out. Over the course of this month, assign somebody to monitor the impact. What panned out, what went really well, and what didn't. And then record your own company case study to streamline processes moving forward. How can we better prep? Do we need a 6-month lead time headed into Pride 2024? Create your own blueprint for success. Bob, before I get to our final pieces here, I know you'll be thinking about some closing statements as we get to questions. Couple more takeaways here. Hopefully each of you received. We are so happy with our new Pride Guide. If you love this visual on the screen, it can be yours with a simple download on our website. Thoroughly and intentionally communicate all of your Pride initiatives. Prepare executive leaders and take this space to revamp your employee resource groups. Ask yourself the hard questions. Are we as diverse as the LGBTQ plus community? Are we amplifying intersectional stories? Are we providing those brave spaces for our allies to join? Or can we assume good intent and allow people to have their learning journey in our midst? Pride is a time for all of it. And finally, take a deep breath, and perhaps most importantly this Pride Month, remember, and I mean this with my whole heart, really, and on behalf of all of us, remember to be proud and to find joy in the community this June. These are also some of my favorite photos of Erin, somebody you all know so well, because they cannot take away our joy. And if we strip away our own joy, then we're stripping away some of our own personhood. And we as a community have been through some really dark, challenging times. Many in our community, many of us are facing elements of that right now, and we are still finding the ability to love, to live, and to find joy and purpose in community and with each other. So with that, thank you all so much. I'm going to give Bob some closing words here as I scan some of these very thoughtful questions that have come in while I was going through our final checklist here.
Dina, I remember I've been to virtually every summit, and the first one, when we finished that day, everybody got up and folded their chair and put it away. That was the first summit. So you come a long way, baby. But one of the things that doesn't change is the expression and feelings. I know that many come when they come out of a summit and they've been in the exhibition area and they've witnessed and they've talked to many BRG leaders. They've talked to many brands, all in this room mashed up together. And they said, I have never been in such a joyful space. And at the end of the day, as hard as we face the issues that we're facing today, this is a business case. It always will be a business case, but it's grounded in the love and unconditional acceptance that we give to each other. And as business leaders, this is quite a tribute to the work we're doing. So God love you all, and be brave and clear in doing it. And we have your back.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob. I'm looking now at some of the questions. Yes, absolutely. So a comment here about that some of the data trying to reinforce the attacks, if you will, on some companies or on Pride Month, and the headlines have been really devoid of the buying power of the LGBTQ plus community. So do use that in your own internal talking points. Do tether your own decision making to that, both in terms of the actual buying power, and then look at the extrapolations in terms of the population data, depending on your key stakeholder groups.
Dina, I noticed there's concern because some of these backlash stories have emphasized impact on share price or on other metrics. My cautionary note to you is and I do it when I talk to journalists all the time. I said there is no rational connection between a setback, say for example, one beer brand, and the failure or the tumbling of an entire brewery's share value. If there were a direct connection or relationship between those, that would be a first, because the marketplace and Wall Street doesn't operate that way. It is based on a variety of conditions, issues, and supply, demand, a lot of issues, supply chain issues, a lot of things, and seasonal. They're seasonal. Probably in the packaged goods area, those marketplaces probably are volatile because those are changing quickly, the tastes and the needs of consumers. But let us not allow journalists or anybody else to get away with the notion that a company is going to be savage in the marketplace because of standing up for principle. If you notice it, by the way, about 20 brands today are under some kind of boycott threat. Trust me, not all of them, or perhaps any of them, have found a real connection to a share price based on those threats.
That's right. And I'm recalling, Bob, I mean, back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, when perhaps arguably some of these boycotts felt even more threatening, there was a fair amount of confidential market data gathered by the companies at that time that did demonstrate that no, these boycotts did not, in fact, impact the bottom line. I want to address, there are a couple of questions here. There's some themes emerging. One is, well, one's rather blunt. It's advice for effectively shutting down non-inclusive or even hateful speech and rhetoric in the workplace. A couple of things there to distinguish. An individual can harbor confusion, anxiety about LGBTQ plus terminology and still show respect in the workplace. But crossing the line to hate speech or harassment against any protected group is both against the law now and likely against your company's policy. So I would ensure that you are distinguishing between, is this a moment of engagement or is this a moment of engaging the appropriate department? Because there's not a gray area when it comes to something like hate speech. A second, this is a good one, and we are seeing this a lot. So the gist of this question is that the primary challenge that this company is having is continued raised expectations of the Pride BRG. And if I'm understanding the gist of this, it's that those raised expectations are maybe coming rapidly and are not always tethered to the business needs in that moment. So how do you reconcile internal stakeholder interests? A couple of tactical pieces here, and then I'd like Bob to reflect on this in particular, which is, what do we do when the Pride BRG is sort of asking for the moon and stars, and the different stakeholders are saying, ooh, let's get the map first. Let's try to, and it feels like a tension point. Does it have to be a tension point? Well, the Pride BRG, I think, one, facilitating good organization and good leadership. Do you have annual goals and plans? And are those just continually getting upset and thrown out the window, or are you actually lacking those plans? Often something that looks like tension or an interpersonal moment can actually be resolved with better structure and organization. So what did you set out to do as a BRG? Who are the primary and appropriate points of contact, whether it's with government affairs, whether it's with the DEI division, but how are you giving appropriate vehicles for dialogue as opposed to kind of an ongoing level of crisis management or sort of taking to social media to express displeasure? I think there also can be a space here for all of the BRGs to come together with appropriate internal stakeholders to be grounded in some of the priorities and the realities of the company. If you are one of the companies that's grappling with potential, tax penalties, or you're grappling with some uncertainty in the market, well, your BRGs need to know that. Maybe now's not the time to gamble with a particular merchandise, particular brand. So this should never be an adversarial set of relationships. You are all working towards common goals, perhaps with some different timelines and different tactics in mind, but certainly reconcilable. But Bob, you've been in the middle of a lot of those internal stakeholder meetings.
The one thing that I'm very proud of to see more BRGs get it, that they are not siloed anymore, that they have common values and goals with other BRGs. And I think the more you learn and mentor each other, the better. The more you really use your executive mentor, the one who is in the C-suite perhaps, who's going to be able to guide you. And third, in this workforce hungry economy, how are the BRGs drivers of talent recruitment? And I think talent is such an important need for every company that BRGs could be major solution providers.
Excellent. Looking at super holiday. Okay, I'm gonna actually take something in the last few minutes here, which is engagement when individuals are expressing that pride is antithetical to their personal beliefs, be they religious or political. I'm going to illuminate with one of my favorite stories, which is I was doing it in a multi-month consulting engagement with a gaming company, so one of the big gambling hospitality companies. This was about 13 years ago, and was getting into all the ins and outs of LGBTQ inclusion. A woman said, I'm sorry, this is just against my religion. I mean, it's clear as day in the Bible, et cetera, et cetera. I respectfully said, indeed, I'm hearing you. And we're here on a gaming property. The liquor's flowing, the gambling's happening. My mama was a Sunday school teacher, and there are a couple Bible passages about those behaviors. In other words, and with the levity aside, we all find a way to reconcile our individual belief systems with those of our employers. So fundamentally, and this is a misconception that businesses are attempting to sort of change minds. What businesses are doing is articulating how the synergy between their core values and principles, the interplay between that and their business objectives, attracting a diverse and productive workforce, reaching the right consumer market. Those two, that's where the synergy is. And so when you sign your employment contract, you're not signing away your personal belief systems, but what you're saying is when I'm working, I will be respectful of my colleagues. I will be on board, whether it's with the new tomato soup we're marketing or the new tech program that we're launching. And so that's a pretty flimsy, it's a pretty flimsy argument, because this is actually not a space to debate the Bible or to debate the depth of personal beliefs, because when we sign on with a private sector employer, we are signing on to be good stewards of those business priorities. And for so many companies, business priorities mean LGBTQ plus inclusion. Bob, closing words maybe in our last few minutes here in terms of the arc of change and how to reconcile these seemingly disparate interests. You've worked with the gamut of US companies.
Yeah. Well, let's just say this. I want everyone to leave today more inspired about the future than anxious about today or the past, because the American people are with us. Our side is one of optimism, possibilities, opportunity, equity, inclusion. These are values that are intrinsic to the LGBTQ civil rights movement, but they are also embodied in the needs of our economy. And so to me, the mission of Out and Equal speaks directly to empowering us to help make that vision a reality. And so I'm extremely optimistic. I get beaten down like all of us and disappointed in the ugly, but I see the beautiful. And as we wake up every day, especially as Pride season is upon us, it's up to us to lead with that. So my hat's off to you, Dina, and to Out and Equal for making this path so clear.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bob, for the support. On behalf of Aaron Uritis, our CEO, our entire team, happy Pride to each of you. We're going to keep the conversation going. We are going to send around a really fast survey. We just want to know what's happening inside your companies. This is not for sharing publicly. Again, thank you all so much. Let's keep the conversation going. And again, happy Pride to each and every one of you. Thank you for everything you do to make your workplaces more inclusive.